Hi, all. We're here for another episode of the HR Engage podcast. And as always, I'm pretty excited. I'm really excited, actually. I'll take to another level excited to really have someone that I really admire, a professional speaker. He's going to tell us all about himself, very, very soon. But AJ Kulatunga. AJ, how you going?
Good, mate. Thank you so much for having me here. Very keen to get in here and serve your audience. I've met a few of them and they're just awesome people, and the mission that they do is truly remarkable. So very keen to serve today. Whatever you have come out of me, hopefully it's useful.
Well, AJ, you've already got a lot of fans from the HR Engage podcast, actually. So I've had actually a lot of people saying, hey, can you get AJ on the podcast? And of course, as always, me, Jonathan, being the man of the people, must do so. So AJ, that's why you're on here on the podcast. But AJ, I actually have met you a few times now. We've had some great conversations. I've gotten to know you, but you're in front of us. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I really struggle with this question because everyone's kind of different. And a big part of what I do is fit into the world that I'm speaking to. So professionally, I'm a professional speaker and business strategist. I've spent 10 years speaking, 20 years doing business strategy in various forms. My background is technology and business. And I grew up in Darwin, so to Sri Lankan parents. So it's really interesting. I was born and raised in Australia, Sri Lankan parents. So I've got a really unique vantage point on life, career, and business. And that has become my superpower in the world of speaking. So I'm engaged by all sorts of organizations, ranging from your multinational tech companies to your little small business associations in regional Australia. And it's been such an incredible journey, just meeting a bunch of amazing people, some not so amazing people, as we've spoken about before. And just taking the topic of, business creativity and now impact and influence to around spreading the message where people can impact and influence others.
Now, a lot of people who are listening to this podcast have either potentially seen you or heard those words, impact and influence. And because I've heard that a few times from a lot of the people who actually listen to this podcast, and actually past guests have mentioned that quite a few times. So I want to just ask you, just give us a little bit of a rundown of your journey to becoming a professional speaker, and in particular speaking to HR managers and HR professionals.
Yeah, okay. So I started about a little over 10 years ago. And the precursor to how I started was when I was born and raised in Darwin. And for those of you who haven't been in Darwin or never visited, it's such a beautiful place, but there's not much happening there in terms of, when you're growing up as a kid, you get very bored. And that was me. I was very bored. And my traditional Sri Lankan parents were always like, don't bother coming home unless you get an A from school, right? So I was never really that great in studies, and I was always looking for, let's say, avenues to channel my creativity and adventure spirit into. So when I graduated from university, I got a consulting job, and I did really well there, and then I encountered a bad boss who wanted to kill my career, so I left that job, and then I started my own consulting firm, and I grew that to 13 staff members and won awards and things like that. And so how I started speaking was, I would tell, during those days, it was very much about following your dreams. How does a young person take the unconventional path to entrepreneurship? These days, the topic is everywhere and there's so much knowledge. But when I started, there was nothing out there. So it was a bit of a thing, if you will. So I started speaking at schools and the local university, and through my community development activities through my company, we're always looking at how do we support the community, create opportunities for other cool young people out there. And so through all of that, I won Young Achiever of the Year awards. And after that, I got asked to open the NT Business Month function, which is like a big conference throughout the month of October Business Month. It's like a big festival for business. Yeah. And there I opened the stage for another professional speaker, and she came up to me afterwards and said, "Oh my God, you're amazing. Who represents you?" And I said to her, "What do you mean represents?" Because coming from Darwin, you don't know what you don't know, right? And she said, "Represents, takes the bookings, takes the fees." I'm like, "You get paid for this? No way." So she was like, "Oh, honey, come along." And then began this journey of learning about the professional side of speaking. And it involves three main things, because I teach this to others, and I'm always having conversations with people who aspire to be, transition from public speaker to professional speaker, is that you got to know your content, you got to know the business of speaking, you got to know the craft of speaking, and all of that is also encompassing audience psychology. You really need to understand these domains, and that's what makes you, you're able to create opportunities for yourself as a professional speaker, and you run it like a business. And that's the difference between public speaking. You might turn up and talk. Professional speaking is a whole nother level. It's basically, we are a professional service, much like your accountants, your lawyers, that sort of thing. You do provide a professional service of education and entertainment. So we're sort of consultants, but we're also sort of entertainers. And it's this weird hybrid world. The second part of your question is, how did I end up talking to HR professionals? So I got introduced. So, oh, geez, this is an interesting story, and I'll keep it medium. We'll go on a bit of a journey here. So coming up through the ranks as a professional speaker, I tried to get as many gigs as I can coming up through the ranks, and they say, speak everywhere so that people would see you. So I decided to host a public event in, I think, about 2019, I think, or maybe 2017. Around that time, I hosted a public event in my hometown, Darwin, and I got there, and there was some guy that really just he'd been trying to be a speaker as well and run sessions at this particular venue, and they wouldn't give him the time of day, because back in the 1960s he discovered fire or something, I don't know, right? It was just something, right? So he was really jealous that I got the venue support, and the venue was supporting me and promoting me. So he was really jealous, and he turned up to my session, and he heckled me for 60 minutes straight. And at the time I was going through some difficulties, mental health challenges, and I didn't shut him down as quickly. So this almost turned into a punch up. And when this happened, I handled it appropriately, and he left the building, escorted out of the building. And afterwards, one of the people that stayed to make sure that I was okay, because it was a very disturbing situation for everyone involved, as best as we handle it. And she had a coffee with me, and I said to her, "Oh, what do you do?" She goes, "Oh, I'm in HR." and we had the best time, kept in touch, and a couple of years later she became the NT state president for ARI, Australian Human Resources Institute of Australia. And so she said, "Oh, AJ, there's only one speaker I want at my conference," and so that's how I entered into speaking to HR professionals. And I know that's a bit of a medium length story or a long story, but that is so much about my life and my career. It is not a linear path. It is a whole bunch of little moments that I connect up the dots in the most magical ways possible, and they end up, even how I met you, Jonathan. There's a story behind that for next episode, right? But yeah, so that's how I started, and I've done 2 state conferences with Ari, and yeah, it's introduced me to the world of HR, and I'm passionate about people as well. And it's the amount of work that HR professionals are trying to, as the kids would say these days, level up. It is an enormous challenge, and I do not take it lightly that I'm one of the amazing professionals that support HR leaders without being in HR themselves. So yeah, great responsibility. No pressure on me, eh?
Well, the feedback I receive from people who've actually watched you is incredible, and a lot of people ask me, what's AJ like, and I go to them, I say, look, AJ's a professional speaker, so there's no consulting on the side. There's not a lawyer like me. There's none of this stuff. He's a professional speaker. This is what he does. So yeah, absolutely, he should be 99 out of 100 all the time, pretty much. Like I get that.
Thank you. Yeah, just to clarify, mate. Yeah, my vehicle is speaking. I do. But after I speak, like, I'd get that audience reaction. So the business incorporates consulting, workshops, coaching, executive coaching, and all that.
Sorry, yeah, there is that workshop.
But it's predominantly, I call myself a speaker. I think of myself as a speaker, and that's the introduction point to all these amazing organizations out there that do want to go on a deeper journey with me and unpack impact and influence, or perhaps they want to, speak about innovation, creativity, or perhaps they want to, shift their leaders' thinking. I'm doing an interesting engagement where I'm working with a HR leader who's looking to establish an emerging leaders program inside their organization. So my work is very varied, and it's all through the vehicle of speaking, I suppose. I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, of course, and clarification note, of course.
Thank you.
Just there's this passion that comes out of you, natural passion. Look, we've heard your story, which it's a bit of a weird story around a punch up leading to, or a near punch up leading to a speaking opportunity. But where does that passion comes from? Because obviously there's, as an example, there are ex-Olympians, there's sports stars, there's I don't know, someone's appeared on My Kitchen Rules or Survivor or something like that, and they become a speaker. I get that, but why yourself, AJ? Why did you become so passionate about speaking? And then conversely, then going, okay, well, the human resources sector really needs what I have to speak about, which is that sort of impact and influence side of things.
Yeah, so this is a really unconventional answer, but it's not a positive passion is how I describe it.
Okay.
So a fun fact is that AJ is short for my full name, Arjuna. And Arjuna, my background Sri Lankan, and Arjuna was a warrior king during the ancient times. And so I've embodied this archetype, this warrior archetype throughout my whole life. And what I found is I'm always fighting for something, whether that's to be, coming up through the ranks to be seen, to be heard, be valued, whether that's in my own family, whether that's at school, whether that's at, my first job, whether that's with the clients I deal with, because no one really wakes up in the morning and goes, you know what, I need to be more innovative, right? No one does that. So I find that this whole archetype of being a warrior and picking and choosing fighting has been a common theme. And so my passion is about fighting for others who are fighting for something. And within the context of HR, like I said, the responsibility of shifting the world of work is enormous, and what I've found in the conversations that I've had all with your members, but in the larger HR community, is that they're perceived in a certain way. And that perception really limits a lot of things. It limits opportunities, both professional and personal opportunities. It limits organizational opportunities, because if you think HR is just administrative and compliance, you are missing the point. But it is what it is, right? So I find that a lot of communities that I serve, the professional communities that I serve, they're all fighting for something. And it's really interesting. They're all fighting to be seen, be heard, and be valued, And I find that with HR, I find that with finance professionals. I just did a recent conference, management accounting forum. That was, it stunned me because, it stuns me because CFOs are really, they run businesses, through the numbers. And the amount of times that the conversations I had was, yeah, my organization does not listen to me. It's fascinating. So there are all these professionals out there that are fighting some sort of a battle, all right? And they're my favorite type of people because I've been in that same trenches with them. And I think that if we can all jump in the trenches and lead each other forward, we get to change the world. So, my passion for what I do is actually stemming from negativity. I don't want to like hold hands and change the world like that.
Yeah.
It's driving real sustainable change, my whole ethos is tomorrow better than today. What can we fix today that make tomorrow better for the next generation and whatnot? So again, I do apologize for these these long-winded answers, but hopefully I'm connecting the dots for you people enough to get a sense of who I am and how my work is useful for others.
I think HR professionals, HR teams have a frustration at the moment, or there's several frustrations. Don't get me wrong, but maybe there's an overall frustration at the moment that maybe there is too much to do or to work through. And you talked about being listened to and being heard. A lot of our past guests have talked about making sure, trying to get a seat at the table, essentially an ability to have influence or even straight out executive ability to make decisions. You've come across a number of HR professionals at varying levels and varying stage, varying seniorities. What are your thoughts of that frustration that HR have right now?
It's very real. It's very real, and perhaps I don't think anyone has been under so much pressure to navigate the changes that we're going through right now. So globally, we're going through what's known as the fourth turning, and every 80 years or so, society breaks down and rebuilds itself, and we're amongst one of those turnings right now. And it hasn't been 80 years, and what's happened in this particular cycle is that the acceleration of technology, the change in human behavior, we've got 6 different generations can be in one workforce. We've got technology, AI as well as quantum, and Internet of Things and all sorts of stuff. And all the foundational technologies and the human behavioral changes are now converging. And the HR leader has to pick up the phone and, or respond to the email. And it is an incredible burden and responsibility. And so the challenge is very real and the pressure is very real. I'm seeing that across the board. And I think the ones that are navigating it, they've just, they've had experience before in these sort of things. And no one really knows how anything is going to turn out. But they all have confidence in themselves and their abilities. And I think there's a lot of experimentation going on. And I think this is why your podcast is pivotal for the movement forward, because, HR leaders get to share openly and honestly, what works, what doesn't work, what they were thinking on your platform. And I think, I just recommended your platform, this podcast, to another up and coming employment lawyer in Sydney at a gig. And, she is so excited to be able to soak up, the wisdom that's being shared on this platform. So congratulations to you, mate, in doing this. And thank you. Thank you for hosting this platform too.
Oh, appreciate that. And it's great to look. I love kudos as much as the next guy. I really do. But I think as well, because of this podcast, and of course the work that I do with the HR teams as an employment lawyer, I am seeing a lot of trends, which, yes, there is a legal solution to, some of those things around government regulation, for example. Yes, there's going to be some stuff around maybe the technology piece too, but I do see that mindset at the moment, and that sort of head hitting the brick wall, the metaphorical brick wall that we talked about. And your thoughts are to that one, that's what you're seeing too. That confirms it. What do you say to those professionals who are dealing with those, their head hitting that brick wall, they can't quite get through? How do they have that impact, have that influence? What's your thoughts on that? How do they cut through?
So one of the things I shared with the group was my framework, which is the TLC framework, and it stands for Think, Look, and Communicate. And unlike other professional speakers out there, it's not a 5-step plan to achieve an outcome. It's actually a set of principles. And the reason why the principles is that earlier on in my career, I would go learn from professional speakers and they'd give me step-by-step instructions on what to do. So I'd start stepping away and, I could never get the same results as what they did. And, some of your listeners might be realizing, okay, that's really naive to think I could do that. But, I didn't realize at the time. And what I discovered was that, I'm trying to implement the same set of steps that someone else that went through in entirely different circumstances, went through. It was never going to work for me, So what I learned to do was distill the principles behind everything I do, everything I learn. And so the principles are think, look, and communicate. And when you embrace them and try and figure out how they apply to you, all of a sudden you start, the brick wall, the metaphorical brick wall starts to come down one brick at a time. So, I won't go into too much depth into the framework and bore everyone out there. But basically, it's about, how do you think about things differently so that everyone else is doing things one way and you might be doing it differently. So probably the most useful thing out of the framework, the think, the look, and the communicate, is I approach impact and influence as a thinking challenge, not necessarily changing the way you communicate. That's just the outcome. But when you think about a problem differently, it all of a sudden unlocks opportunities, unlocks pathways that never were there before. So I think the biggest lesson I'd like to leave, or principle I'd like to share with your audience, is this whole idea of thinking about the moment when a decision is made, and I call that the point of impact. And right at that moment in space and time, someone is trying to make a decision. And in that moment, only one thing matters. A person will make a decision congruent with their identity, meaning that they will decide based on who they are as a human. And what I find is a lot of people, including HR leaders, they'll present data, they'll present this, they'll present that, and in the end, the decision's made like, none of that matters. So, for example, every organization around the world right now is going through some sort of transformation and change. Part of that is involving reducing headcount. Now, it's not that they actually want to reduce headcount. The directive from the board or the senior leadership team is we've got to cut costs by 30%. And somewhere along the line, someone says, all right, reduce headcount. Not necessarily that's the only way to cut 30% out, but let's say it's a strong default for many organizations. Now, the HR leader there, they don't want to reduce headcount. They might not want to reduce headcount. I mean, everyone, as varied as the industry is and as the profession is, in general, everyone loves people in HR, right? At the fundamental, different varying levels, of course, and not yes. 24/7 for sure, right? So what's interesting is, well, how does that HR leader almost impact up and say, you know what if we don't do headcount? What if we reduce the other costs like that? And so when you think about the moment of impact, let's say that gets presented and they've got all the data that shows, other things will be better off in reducing the 30% rather than cutting a headcount. And the person might still go ahead and go, nah, let's do the headcount, and that person is operating on who they are as a human, right? And what makes a person who they are is their identity. And their identity is comprised of two things. The first thing is the lived experience. That person has been through a ton of experiences in their life. We all have, right? It shapes who we are, whether or not we like it or not. The second thing is the stories that we're told. They form who we are. And if a story is told really well, it becomes a lived experience, So when you keep that in mind, you realize, okay, if you want someone to make a decision, you got to start way earlier. You got to start using the power of strategic storytelling and release great stories, And, something that's public right now is the technology company Atlassian just announced they're reducing headcount. Now, Atlassian are getting roasted for that because they've got their public story is, where work doesn't feel like work. What work does not feel like work? If you're unemployed, right?
Yep.
So they are getting roasted at the moment. So again, it's all about the story. So the HR leader needs to build it before they need it, needs to build the impact, build the influence before they need it, So that could be listening to this podcast. It could be, building relationships. For instance, if they had a really strong relationship with the financial team, maybe they could get the numbers to show that maybe there's other ways that could be cutting costs that are more play out publicly in the media. So this is why the topic is so important, and it's just imperative that leaders start shifting their mindset around how they approach these challenges. And I think that is what the TLC framework, that's the think part. And I think if you get the think part right, it'll probably give you 80% of advantage out there, and then the other stuff is just pick it up along the way.
So what I'm getting at there is it's almost that HR professional almost has to have not necessarily a new set of skills, but work on a different, and probably a little different skill set, or maybe a different mindset, but probably the best way to do it, to say that, to almost bring people along on a journey, right?
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Yeah.
It's a capability, and it's interesting because whenever I talk at conferences, whether that's HR, finance, technology, business, whatever, they all seem to gravitate towards this idea of move people from where they're at, not where you're at. And this is even in the sessions I've had with your audience and sessions I've had with HR leaders. This is a real big thing, moving people from where they're at, not where you're at, and bringing them along the journey. And I think the way I talk about it on stage is, at the end of the day, this is a lot of work, right?
Mm.
But if you're a leader today, the operating environment has changed, and if you're operating out of a set of outdated principles, you're not qualified to be a leader. That is very harsh, and I make no apologies for that, because this is the reality of the situation. And you got to start learning different ways of doing things and building up new capabilities. So shifting mindset of your own and those around you. You've got to articulate ideas in different ways to get buy-in. You have to, as we say, communicate in a way that brings people along on the journey, even if they don't want to move. And HRs are beautiful for that, because if a person really doesn't want to move, there is, very specific procedures in place that I hope no one activates. But if they do, they're there. So it's interesting.
You actually presented at a HR Engage alumni dinner, where we brought along people who've been guests on the HR Engage podcast or who are about to be podcast guests. Now, what was interesting is there was a set of questions that were posed to you at the end, but we didn't get a chance to. And now that you've mentioned that whole idea of bringing people along on the journey, a lot of the questions were centered on this. And what I might do, break HR Engage podcast tradition a little bit. I want to ask these particular questions. So those guests can obviously listen to this and go, yep, there's my answer. And also for those who weren't at dinner, who are listening to this, get some different insights from your position. So the first question I had was, we have employees wanting us to take a position on what's happening in society. How do we meet them where they're at, but still be inclusive of the broader community? Oof, that sounds like a loaded question, but there you go.
Oh, I trust you to lead with the heavy ones.
You, AJ.
So, yeah, so I thought about this, right? And to be concrete, what we're talking about here is there are a lot of social issues out there that companies and organizations are feeling the pressure to comment on.
No.
And I understand where that's coming from. These people feel like they're not being seen, being heard, and being valued, right? And what's interesting is that for certain companies, your people represent some sort of an identity. Like, it's part of their identity that they work for that particular organization. And that's the real key to navigating it all. So, for instance, there's a lot of conflicts out there, world conflicts, and their organizations are getting roasted, and governments indeed, for taking one side and not the other. And then when you take both sides, it sort of diminishes away from the organization real mission. And then it's a case of, well, where do you draw the line? Do we just support every cause and then tie up resources and all that? And I think what organizations need to do is step back a bit and think about the identity that they're dealing with. Now, everyone that's putting pressure on the organization to get a position on these topics, they are feeling that their identity is compromised. But mate, you and I know that your identity is a very fluid thing. To some people, you're an amazing father or mother or brother or sister or uncle or auntie or, another relative, right? That's one identity. To some, you're a great employment lawyer. To others, you might be a sporting superstar. To some people, I'm a guitarist, right? Those people are tone deaf. No, I'm kidding. But this identity. So what the key to navigating that question is taking a step back and looking at, well, what identity do we support? And that is the identity of the organization, the people belonging to that organization. And if you can ensure that through that identity, the people feel seen, feel heard, and feel valued through that specific identity, yeah, they might complain, but it's a safe position to take, because you honor that person for being a part of the organization and you value them for that. you know it's an incredibly challenging thing, but as long as you can honor a person's identity through that context, that's how I would articulate it. And that might mean stepping back on a lot of initiatives and supporting the people as members of that organization, not necessarily members of identity in external factors. So I hope that makes sense. And I'm always happy to clarify further on individual circumstances if anyone wants to drop me a line. It's just my perspective, and there are 1,000 different ways of doing things. So yeah, that's my answer for that question.
There's so many debates on that particular type of question. I mean, not exactly in those words, but the essence of it. Obviously, there's the view that if there's something that we can put forward that basically represents 80% of the organization, I suppose the key part then is, well, what do you do with the other 20 who don't agree? What do you say to those people who say that? Look, it's not the 80% we're concerned about. They're already on board. Whatever, maybe we're a religious organization, or maybe we're a not-for-profit, or hey, we could just be a commercial entity that does energy or something like that. Something out of quite normal, or trades or building. What do you say for the other 20% who might have really strong views that are essentially opposing the grand structural view? What do you say to that? Because you said, like, put it in their context of being seen, valued, and heard, but what does that mean for them?
I think that's the key question you should ask, and have these conversations, because if it is the
Question for
20%,
them. Yeah, I get what
yeah,
you're saying.
yeah,
Yeah.
have the conversation with them, and that's part of it too. What I find that a lot of people get really upset about is if they feel like they're not being engaged, and if it is 20%, go meet with them. This goes back to what I was saying about being a leader, right? There are a lot of different things that you need to do to lead in today's times. Even just, mate, even 2 years ago, leadership 2 years ago looked very different to leadership today. The nuances, like, it's still the same principles,
Yeah.
but the nuances and the issues that people are dealing with, right?
Yeah.
And if people still choose to have an grievance, then that's okay. Then that identity that they've chosen is not reflective of the identity that is congruent to the organization. So, for instance, and I don't know if too many people know this, right? But if there's, let's say, a large multinational organization, and the one I'm thinking about is an entertainment organization, and they had the CEO was, I think, overseas somewhere, and they had an incident in where the head office was, in one of their facilities. And the first thing the CEO got news of this, the first thing the CEO goes, how do we make sure our people are okay? He didn't say that identity, a different identity. He said our people, meaning the identity of that organization. And I think that that's one of the hardest challenges for leaders today, is to really, treat everyone as people who belong to an organization. That's their identity, and if the other 20% choose to, have their grievances, all you can do is support them the best you can. And, again, another answer might be listen to everyone. And yes, you should listen to everyone, but an organization is comprised of limited resources, including time, money, and energy. That's the reality of it, And again, this is very black and white, but moving forward and the way things are going, it is to a certain extent, these leaders have to make these tough decisions. And yeah, it's support as best as you can, but at the end of the day, this is the reality of the situation, that this operating environment, it's a different world today. It's a different world, and that doesn't mean that person is going to be disadvantaged by this. It's just a different change that they might need to navigate moving forward.
AJ, what are the cheat codes to meet people where they are at when they are so far away from where you're at? And in particular, the question is focused on say, a detail oriented person versus more of a big picture person?
Yeah, okay. So, um, coming from my background, entrepreneurial, adventurous, curiosity, that sort of stuff. And also, as you know from hearing stories about my parents,
Yeah.
not
Yep.
academically gifted, right? So, one of the challenges for me coming up through the ranks, and even when I had my consulting firm and navigating things, is I don't really have time for a lot of structure. That's why it's called cheat codes, I suppose. But I like doing things that yield results, but aren't necessarily conventional, as you've heard a lot in my answers today. So one of the things is that I'll try and get a sense of a person's identity as quickly as possible. The easiest thing to do is listen to a lot. So I pay attention to linguistic palettes, like what sort of language choices does this person make? I look at a person's energy. Most importantly, my favorite thing to do is I'll try and meet them where they're at in their office. And the minute I walk into their office, I'm scanning. What's on their desk, what are the pictures on their desk, what are the items on their desk, what is in the room, do they have a picture of a big fishing boat in Darwin, like all these amazing things related to fishing and outdoors activities out there. So it's very easy to see, get the pulse of who I'm dealing with very quickly. So I'm looking to establish a person's identity either through how they show up, whether that's their energy, their linguistic palette, artifacts around them, even how they move, when they walk into the room, how are they moving? Are they moving quickly, slowly? What's their posture like? Indicates confidence. And the reason why I want to know all these things is because I position everything. It's the key to impacting the influence. I don't tell it from my point of view. I position the idea in a world that makes sense to them. So just last week, I did a conference where someone came up to me and says, "Look, loved everything what you said, but I'm a complete introvert. I'm so quiet, and my boss is so loud." And this particular individual was a migrant who'd been in Australia a very, very little time. And she was referring to one of her bosses, big, physically large, physically loud, typical Aussie culture, sport and all that. And I said to her, okay, your superpower is that you know how to listen and they know how to talk. And so I said, whenever you don't be afraid to ask questions, because I think coming from, and her background was Southeast Asian, and our background is really subservient. We don't really like to, yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, and respect our elders and all that sort of stuff, right? So I said to her, look, when you ask questions from our people, we take offense, right? But you talk to someone that loves to talk, they love to answer questions. So ask them a whole bunch of stuff, right? Ask them about, the footy game on the weekend, or did they see the rugby or whatever sport they play, ice hockey or curling or whatever, like whatever. Get a sense of what they love to talk about, then position your ideas inside of that. So in the particular instance, like ask them a question like, what was their worst footy game ever that they've ever seen? She was like, really? That's okay to ask? Yeah, it's fine. They'd love to tell you about it, right? And then whenever you need to present something disastrous, say, hey, boss, remember that worst footy game you've ever seen? Well, this isn't that bad, So yeah, and I'm keen to hear back from her, because whenever I've made these suggestions and I hear back from other people, they say, "Oh my God, it worked!" It's like some magical, as the kids would say, unlock. It's a fascinating thing, and this is really about that leadership capability. Move people from where they're at, not where you're at. Because if she kept going, excuse me, boss, I've got it some bad, like that boss will steamroll over her. you know so it's important that we all grow and learn these leadership capabilities. And just to clarify, mate, I'm still learning. Whenever I
Yep.
go to a new gig and work at a new conference with a new group, I am trying my hardest as quickly as possible to learn the dynamics of the group and the profession. So I spoke at the management accounting forum. Before that day, I had no idea about management accounting. I did the research. As you know, I do an extraordinary amount of research for my gigs. And the presentation I did for you took 86 hours on average. The initial presentation, 86 hours of research, choreography, studying things, learning the room, learning who's at the table, that sort of thing. So it's an extraordinary thing. So I'm still walking the talk, if you will. because I'm deeply conscious of when I don't hit the mark, it impacts my career. So again, that's important for me. So yeah, that's the long-winded answer to that question.
Yeah, it's a very
Briefly,
long-winded answer, AJ. Yeah, but I
yeah,
think
my
there's some
bad.
good points there. I wanted to
Yeah,
ask you. There's another question that came through on that night, and I think this is a really interesting one. And I think a lot of HR professionals listening right now are going to lean in on this question. So, how do you influence leaders that are operating under a directive from their board? And the example that was given was saying the board says they have to cut costs by 30%, and they're blindly going down the reduced headcount route, which we talked about previously. How do you influence them to take different avenues when they are operating under pressure themselves? So it's essentially an extension of what you were saying just before, but more that second part of how do you influence them to take different avenues when they are operating under pressure themselves? It's a really interesting question. Are you sick and tired of receiving advice that is very long, sometimes doesn't make sense, has a lot of legal jargon? All you want is some practical advice so you can achieve whatever those aims are. Maybe you want lawyers that are more preventative than reactionary. Well, maybe South Geldart is the solution. We've been helping HR professionals for a very long time now, and this firm itself is built off over 60 years of history. That's a lot of history. That's a lot of values. So we pride ourselves on being fast, on staying in communication with you, and of course, being really practical with our advice. So the next time a matter comes around, why don't you give South Geldart a try? Check out southgeldart.com.au. I'm Jonathan. I'm the director here for the employment law team, and we'll make sure we take care of you. Now, of course, if you say that you're a listener to the HR Engage podcast, we'll make sure that there might be a little bit of a discount there for you as well.
So the challenge with that is if you're trying, this goes back to what I said about the point of impact. If you're trying to influence at the point of impact, it's not going to work, right? No matter what you say, no matter what you do, it isn't going to work. That's why you have to build the impact and influence before you need someone to make a decision. And this comes down to the underlying sentiment of trust, because trust has shifted. Previously, trust used to be institutionalized trust. So if you released messages and belonged to, government, business, or media, back in the day, people would listen to these messages because we believed as a society, these institutions had our best interests at heart. And over time, that's eroded. And when I do the presentation, I put up the data where that shows trust is eroded. Like people trust messages and people coming from government, large business, and media. So it's being replaced with peer-to-peer credibility, which is why you'll have a government minister announce a fiscal policy, but everyone's listening to someone on TikTok, and making strong financial decisions based on the TikTokers, because that TikToker is showing up without, any traditional agendas. And they're showing up over time. So they've released like 100 videos or whatever. And every time that person pops up, over time, you build a stronger unconscious relationship with them. So going back to answering this question, and also I should have explained right at the start that the way I answer questions is there's a lot of context and then the idea hits. So come on the journey with me, right? And what this is, so, for that leader impacting in that moment, they're going to lose no matter what they do. But for instance, if they had spent a lot of time and energy building up impact and influence, building up trust, and the way you do that is there enough physical footprint and digital footprint around so that people actually trust you? They get a sense of who you are and how you operate and know that you've got their best interests at heart, and then you can influence. So in the particular instance, right, cost cuts the mandates come down, reduce costs by 30%, not headcount, reduce costs. And someone sort of said, look, we need to do headcount. And at that point, if you've got enough trust, you might go visit the finance people and say, look, can you quickly model some scenarios of how this is going to play out? And also meet up with marketing. How is this, once we make the reduced headcount, how is this going to play out in the media for us? What are the costs associated with that in terms of lost reputation, lost business, And then all of a sudden, if the HR leader has done, a consistent built up of trust, they'll get a seat at the table and a voice at the table, But if you have all these artifacts around, they support you in this, and you have all these relationships, people will be more likely to listen to you. And what I find in everyone who sort of asks me similar versions of that question, they haven't done any of the pre-work. They might be new to the organization, and there's very little they can do. And, I'm not one of those speakers that sort of, again, gives a positive outcome, say you can impact and influence everyone. No, these are strategic principles that you follow, and if you don't have, the trust in the bank, then it's not going to be, there's nothing to withdraw, right?
So
you got to be
basically, you
making
need to build up that prep work. You got to build up that trust in the bank prior to this impact. Otherwise, basically, you're saying it's going to be very difficult to influence at that point. You really need to have that trust already built up.
Yeah, and just also, one way to do it, and this sounds so obvious, but it's also amazing how many people don't do it, is keep your word. If you say you're going to do something, follow through on it. And the amount of leaders and professionals that just frivolously say stuff and never act on it is massive. And it's always interesting seeing someone that actually says they're going to do something and they actually do it. All of a sudden it's like, oh, wow, I can actually rely on this person. I trust this person to do what they say they're going to do. Now, obviously, we're all busy humans and things fall through the cracks, whatever. But in general, if you can make and keep a promise, that is the quickest way to build trust in any human within any context. And, a lot of stuff we're talking about is in the professional instance, but you think about personal instances, with children and family members and all that. So, it's applicable to a whole bunch of range of things. Make a promise and keep it.
Yeah, the children one I'm not so sure about, but everything else I totally agree with you. For those who've got children, you know what I'm talking about, so I don't need to explain that. But
it'll come back. Hopefully, it'll come back. When you're old, maybe they'll buy you a house instead of nah.
I think we talk about it does come around, but it might take eventually a bit longer. I get what you're saying. Now, I want to add on to that because I think it's a really interesting point. What about the other way around a little bit? Let's take this a little bit other way around. You have a situation where maybe you're getting frustration, where you're trying to influence someone who you report to, who is just not making decisions. They're not, or they're not following through on whatever's been agreed to, which sounds actually a little bit worse. So you talked about from your perspective, that's how you build trust. But what if you're reporting to someone who just doesn't have that follow through? How do you influence them to actually go and say, hey, let's get that program in place. Let's do that training. Let's actually say yes to some of these things. That's a yes to some of these things, but also let's actually do it.
Yeah, so this goes back down to the point of impact again. What are the lived experiences that this person has gone through, and what are the stories that they've heard? And if they're not acting upon anything that you're saying, it probably something that they are operating on that you're not aware of yet.
Right.
And so for example, what you said just then is that if they're not, they say, I'll do the training, and the training never gets done or signed off on, right? The chances are something else is going on with that particular individual. Maybe that's a different agenda. Sometimes it's a very different agenda that you're not aware of. And, or it could be they're just overwhelmed. Could be a ton of different things, right? Part of what I do predominantly is what's known as execution intelligence, right? How do you actually get an idea done, gone from idea on paper or in a meeting and actually get it done and producing results? And that's one of my specialties on bridging that gap. It's called the execution gap, right? And one of the things I've found is that a lot of people do not take action on things because they're not really too sure how this fits into their own world or how they see themselves a part of that new world. So, if you're talking about managing up, maybe this new training, they don't see exactly how this is going to benefit them in what they're trying to achieve in the organization. So one of the key questions that I encourage and coach my people to do is once they get a commitment, Say, okay, and great, wonderful, you're on board, wonderful. Hey, just want to check in with you. What does that look like when we go through this? What's the next steps for you, and what does that look like for you? And then you just shut up and listen to them, right? Because guaranteed they would not have thought about that. They've just said, yeah, we'll get it done. But they haven't really thought about how this is going to move forward, right? And by you uncovering that, you're forcing them to think about it, and then you'll see the gaps that they're actually thinking about, and you fill those gaps real quickly. Or you make a promise to them and say, I don't know that answer right now. Let me go come back and come back to them with the information so that they can advance it themselves. If it's a not managing up situation and it's someone else, it's the same principle. Like, you need someone to do something. They go, yeah, I'll get it done. All right, well, what does that look like for you? I just want to make sure that, that you're not going to have more burden, on top of this. And they'll go, no, it's no burden. It's this, that, whatever. They will tell you. People will tell you, right?
Yep.
Now, if they don't tell you, then obviously you haven't built up enough trust with them. And a quick hack to do that is what I call strategic vulnerability, right? Or selective vulnerability. And that is to share your own experiences with people. And as leaders, this is like a superpower, share your own experiences, share your own stories so that they get a sense of who you are. If people are not feeling trusted, they're not trusting you, they don't know who you are. And it's your job as a leader to, again, do the hard work. And I think if I could leave anyone, with this podcast perspective from this podcast, is leadership today is even more hard work than ever before, but it's so much more rewarding. And when you put in the hard work, the results and the impact you create, it's just magical, absolutely magical. So yeah, that's my tip in response to that question. It's people don't see themselves inside what you're asking them to do. So help them see themselves inside of that.
There was one more question from the dinner, and I'm pretty sure, well, actually, no, it could be one or three people in my mind who could have asked this question. I can't believe I asked this question on a podcast. But anyway, here we go. Would you rather fight one horse-sized duck or 100 duck-sized horses? I mean, what type of question is that? But anyway, I did promise.
All right, let me ask you a question on that one, man. What do you think the sentiment is behind that question? Like, what is that about, do you think?
I think. Well, gee, was this the point to put it back on me? Well, no. Look, I get this sentiment that it's either one big issue or one big decision maker to influence, or whether it's 100 big issues to deal with, or small issues to deal with, or 100 decision makers to influence. I suspect it's something along those lines.
Yeah, it is. So I looked at it from a challenge perspective. I just want to conquer one big challenge, give it all, David Goliath sort of thing, and then
Silver
smooth
bullet type
sailing.
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, right. But what happened to David afterwards? We don't know, right? Or I don't know. As a Buddhist, I don't know, right? Yeah, he defeated Goliath, but did he get the book deal? Did he get the did he get the Netflix series? We don't know, right? But if you're dealing with as you can imagine, my one's 100 duck-sized horses, because no matter problem after problem after problem, I've got the skills to handle it, and I've got the confidence, the skills, and most importantly, I've got the curiosity to be able to go out there and really navigate any situation. And I think when you've got the courage and the curiosity, they're like your superpowers of the leadership, especially today. To have the courage to be curious is unbelievably powerful today. And I feel like a lot of people don't. They just don't have the courage to even be curious. And the funny thing is, we're all born with curiosity. Like, we see other people around us doing things, and as babies, we aspire to do that too. But it's just as we get older, we get that curiosity sort of replaced with conformity. So what's really interesting is, a few years ago, I would love meeting kids and asking them this one question. And it's interesting to hear how, depending on the age, they'll say something different. So what used to be is, many, many years ago, I would say, go to a 7-year-old, boy, girl, other, doesn't matter, right? I'd say to them, hey, tell me something that's impossible. And they will tell me the most creative answer in the world, and it'd be really interesting. And then now, I think that age is around maybe 4 or less, right? Say, tell me something that's impossible. Because after that, they regurgitate something else that they've heard. And that's just a shift in society. So, moving forward, like I'm dealing with problem after problem after problem, and if I can get good at that, it doesn't matter if it's 100, 1,000, 20,000, it's all good. But if I treat it like one big problem and I give it my all, are the problems going to end there? Maybe, I don't know, but I have no idea what's going to come. I'll probably be exhausted, and then maybe the next challenge defeats me, and we can't have that.
But
So
on
that's
that
how
point,
I approach that. That's
yeah,
how I approach it. And again, there is no right answer. There is no wrong answer. It's just a different perspective. And that's a perspective I've chosen based on my identity.
I mean, I get your point, AJ, and I see what you're saying there. But when we hear about the heroes, right? The guys with the autobiography, the billion-dollar valuation companies, and the multi-million-dollar companies, and the guys have got loads of properties and all this type of stuff, like with their own book deals and whatever it might be. A lot of them get asked this question of what's the one thing that made this huge difference. A lot of them do have an answer to that, and they give that perception that there's a silver bullet. But when I listen to that answer, I think to myself, well, that doesn't really make sense to me. Like it doesn't, and what I mean by that is, yeah, it might be perceived by you that the person that was the big silver bullet. But when you sort of research how they got to that level, it doesn't seem like that's the case. But why do you think after the fact, after the success, after they've succeeded and done the whole thing, they've climbed the mountain, why do you think they do come back and say, oh yeah, it was this, oh, it was because I took care of my people. It's because I invested in this technology. Oh, it's because we merged with this company. Oh, it was a brand change. Like, why do they always put it down to this one? So is it just because of it's a nice bite-sized thing to showcase to people? It's a lovely story, or is there something more to it?
I think that answer suits themselves, but they're not really considering the context behind the question. For me, questions are everything in today's world. Like questions are more important than answers. Especially in the world of AI. Like we know all the answers are out there. It's what we can extract out of the technology today depends on how well our questions are formed. And it's fascinating, and that applies to technology and humans. We are driven by questions. So in other words, how you think is more important than what you think. And in that particular instance that you said, I believe that in that moment, the leader doesn't really have time to reflect on an answer that's conducive to the listener. It's their own answer. Like to them, they like, yeah, I looked after my people and my people looked after me, right? It might be a soundbite, or it might genuinely be the differentiator in that particular context for that particular individual. And this goes back down to what I said before about me talking to all these other speakers and learning their secrets. It didn't really serve me, right? They're giving me the information because of what worked for them, but it did not work for me. So one of my favorite questions to ask when I was coming up through the ranks as an entrepreneur, I would meet all these amazing business people in Darwin. I'd just be like, oh my God, they're my heroes. Business people used to be my heroes, right? Anyone in business and successful business, right? And one of my favorite questions whenever I'd get some time with them would be, heaven forbid, but you lost everything. What would you do the very next day you woke up? What would you do to rebuild the empire again? And I remember asking this question from someone that I really respected, a property developer. And he'd built all these amazing buildings that I've been in, really cool. And he won awards, and I was like,
Mm-hmm.
wow, this is so and so. So when I spoke to him and I asked him that question, and it was in front of everyone, there would have been a room of 150 people,
Yep.
and I asked him this question: what would you, heaven forbid, you lost everything, what would you do to rebuild tomorrow? And he laughed and he said, I wouldn't. I wouldn't. All right, I wouldn't. And everyone in the room laughed, and I walked away from that going, that's an interesting answer. Like, wow, okay, interesting. 6 months later, this guy is in court and about to go to jail for doing something. I can't remember the specifics, but yeah. And I thought to myself,
Not good.
wow, that's
Not
really,
good. Or
yeah,
whatever it is,
yeah,
not good, right? Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, right. And it was interesting because how you think is more important than what you think. And in
Yeah.
his answer, I realized, okay, this is a one-trick pony. right? It's very hard once you break through for success, but to have repeated success, you need to go through a whole different set of challenges, right? And, you hear like billionaires like, Oprah and Sarah Blakely, and I forget the ones coming out of Southeast Asia, right? But these amazing billionaires have gone through several different forms of challenges, right? And that's the reason why they're so successful. They've taken the learnings and they've turned them into earnings, So yeah, it's interesting, but it goes back down to, questions more important than answers. How you think is more important than what you think. And if you are the person being asked the question, pause before you give it and think about the subcontext of the question. What is this question actually trying to, like, why is this person asking me this question? What is going on in their world that I can serve them with an answer? And every time I do Q&A on stage, I have to be very good at this. So, because yeah, it's interesting, and I do get some curly questions. And also, I recently got a question where the person was they'd taken a personal grievance against me and wanted to discredit me in front of the room, and I had to deal with that. And it's interesting, the sort of things that people bring to as audiences. Everyone's so critical these days. It's incredible. So, the way I describe it is every time I hop off stage, I get shot, So it's very nice to do a gig, and your dinner was amazing. The people that you had there was amazing. And I've had a few conferences where I didn't get shot, I got hugged, which is fantastic, metaphorically speaking, of course.
I just want to also add to that point, because it's very easy sitting there as an audience member, right? And no matter that the speaker is not for you or not the best or whatever it might be, there's a lot of vulnerability going up there, especially if you're by yourself or even as a panel. But even as a panel, you're still there up on the stage where everyone's looking at you. I would just say to people, don't be so quick to judge, because those people who are going up there, there's actually quite a lot of vulnerability, bit of courage. Yes, they're meant to be content experts or whatever the expertise is meant to be. But also, yeah, I'll just remind people, especially people who are listening to my podcast, to be kind to those people. Yes, you need to give some feedback, but don't just be critical, be constructive as well. Like, if you're going to give feedback, it wasn't good, give a reason, and maybe a suggestion as to how that person could be better. I would just add that, because I think, yes, I've been an audience member. I've also been a speaker. And I think, for those who don't really know what it's like to be a speaker, there is a vulnerability to it. So I would just get people to take a little bit of time. One, I'd very much, no matter positive or negative, provide feedback. Actually put some effort, because a lot of the people who are presenting are putting effort in as well. And the second thing is that if you're going to be critical, that's fine, but be constructive of it. Actually provide constructive feedback so they can actually improve and hopefully use as a building block for bigger and better things.
And can I just add an example of constructive feedback? So there's a section in my keynote called Impact and Influence. There's a section in there where I talk about presence, like physical presence. And this is the one where I say, when you get a seat at the table, do you literally just take a seat at the table and stay within your own personal space, like a little square around you? Don't take up as little space as possible. Or, and if you are like that, bring your elbows out a little bit more, just so that you're a little bit more comfortable, take up a little bit of space. And then the opposite of that is, if you're the sort of person to sit down at the table and take up the entire table, bring it in, Johnny Bravo, right? And that line gets a laugh, because we've all seen or heard of that person that, does that. And in my head, it's in particular response to the behavior that I've seen mostly from males, who take up a lot of room at the table and, larger than life characters. And I say, bring it in, because energy is perceived differently. And the feedback that I got from a recent conference where they said they loved the presentation, and, if they could offer me something to make it even better, was that when I say that line, what this person said was the person next to her was physically big, right? And they got self-conscious over that. And so until she said that, I didn't even think of that scenario because I
Yeah.
was operating on a certain pathway and I thought, okay, great. And that is so useful. So now I've incorporated that into the presentation to actually address that, because I don't want people, of different body shapes and sizes to feel as though that is attacking them, And it was so great the way she said that and how she brought it up. It was useful. And I think that's the biggest thing. If you are going to offer people feedback, make sure it's useful. Coming up and telling me that, that was really crap and this and that is not useful to me. It is not going to make me a better speaker, which is most speakers, they aspire to be better, some of them do not want to learn. Fair enough.
Sure. Yeah.
I heard the best word the other day from our mutual friend, Kylie Chown. She came up with this word called speakertude. It is the attitude of speakers that really put people off. It's the best word. So Kylie, props to you. And she's a good mate of Jonathan and mine, and she's actually the reason why I know Jonathan. So thank you, Kylie, for the introduction, and checks in the mail, girl.
Now, I always ask every podcast guest this particular question. What is the one thing about human resources that people might disagree with you about?
Disagree with me on my opinion of human resources? That's the lowest, like the easiest thing. I'm genuinely a fan. Like, human resource professionals, HR leaders, employment leaders, they are unsung heroes to me, and if I say that sometimes inside the business, I get a funny look and a scrunched up face saying, mate, no, they are this, they are that, they are gatekeepers, they are handbrakes, whatever. But when I poke them a little bit on why that is, it turns out that the person who's sharing this feedback with me, they're the ones that have the issue, and they never see things from a different perspective. So that's more on them. So that's something I openly challenge people on, because I'm a big fan of the changing world of work, and I know the responsibilities of the custodians of work is how I refer to HR leaders. So yeah, I'm deeply respectful and in awe of some of the things that they do, because it is one of the hardest jobs, especially in today's world. So that's what I challenge people on, to really reframe that and take a look at things from a different way, because, like anything, there are opportunities available if you just look at things in a different way.
Brilliant. I want to change tack a little bit.
Okay.
So we've got a tradition here on the HR Engage podcast. We ask these rapid fire questions.
Oh, yeah.
There's a few of them. We'll ask them. First thing that pops into your head, just say it. Okay? Sound good?
Okay. I might need a lawyer after this, but let's go.
No. AJ, let's keep it PG, mate. Let's keep it PG.
All right, mate. All right.
All right. So what is your favorite movie?
Oh, Beverly Hills Cop 2.
2, not 1.
2.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Why?
More comedic factor.
Ooh,
and I just saw it, and there's a Ferrari in there. It's just all levels of cool, man. I could recite it word for word, probably.
Judge Reinhold
influence on me.
Judge Reinhold is excellent in number 2.
Yeah.
He is brilliant.
Yeah.
I got to agree. He is
Billy's really out there, isn't he, Axel?
He is good. I have to say.
Yeah.
What is your favorite holiday destination, AJ? I know you fly around a little bit, but what's your favorite holiday destination?
Sri Lanka, purely because I have such fond memories of my family back then and doing all these amazing things. I'm at a stage in life where I'm very nostalgic for those early days. My parents have since left us. They're dead, not visiting, traveling overseas, right? So they're, I miss those days when we all used to go on holidays every single year to Sri Lanka and just have fun and adventure, and because of that's where I get my sense of adventure from, and it's helped me immensely in my entrepreneurial career. So yeah, Sri Lanka.
Awesome. And apart from family and friends, who has inspired you the most?
Oh, this is a really tough one, because I draw inspiration from everyday people. Like, for instance, you, my friend, inspire me simply because you've got the consistency to I want to create a podcast. I want to do this. I want to, you made a promise and you kept it, so that's inspirational to me. A whole bunch of people every day. I'm a big fan of everyday heroes. Growing up, I saw the traditional heroes and idols and whatnot. And as I've grown through my career, I've realized, there are extraordinary people doing little things that really inspire me to, take my game to the next level. And also, I feel as a speaker, I feel some level of responsibility of my own pushing the envelope, because I have to ask people to do the same with them. And that's big. I have to do it myself. So, yeah, I'm inspired by everyday heroes.
Oh, excellent. Okay. What is a thing you do outside of work that you are passionate about or keeps you going?
So I mentioned as a joke guitar, and I always thought I was good on guitar, but I spoke to someone and she said the most interesting thing. She was talking about sport. She's an amazing BJJ, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu world champion, amazing. And I said, "Oh, I'm more a musician than sports." And before I could say anything else, she's jumped on me and said, "Oh, it's exactly the same thing." And I've gone, "What? No!" And so after a quick conversation, I realized that I'm not a musician. I just happen to play a few notes on guitar. So I want to explore that deeper, because what she was talking about as a learning framework, I apply to everything else, but I have not applied it to guitar. So yeah, that's probably what I'm going to do, like go in a little bit deeper and try and understand the world of music a bit more.
Cool. And tell us something about yourself that people don't know about you.
Oh man, there is so much. There is so much, and I think AJ is a very fluid concept. For a lot of people, some people, will see me as the guitar guy on Instagram or whatever. Some people will be like professional speaker. Some be like, "You're Sri Lankan? Oh my god!" So there is so much about me, and I think, I know something. A lot of people will see me on stage, larger than life, and they'll think I'm a full-time extrovert, but I'm actually what's known as an outgoing introvert. So I spend a lot of time self-reflection, self-thinking, and I think the best speakers in the world, best professional speakers anyway, they're greater listeners and they are talkers. So
Wow.
yeah, that's something. That's something. Yeah, I'm a very quiet individual.
That did surprise me, actually. Yeah, that surprised me that you've said
yeah,
that.
got one.
Now, as we close up this podcast, I think there's been so many great points. To be honest, I can't even rattle out so many, because there's just been so many fantastic points.
Has there been one
made.
particular that really resonated with you and you think the members would love?
Well, I think the one that, there's
Useful,
quite a few,
useful.
but there is one that I thought was very interesting, and that was the idea of influencing people who are not making the decision. They're just not going to make the decision. They've said yes, but they're just not making that decision. And you've sort of put it back and said, well, actually, you haven't. You feel, you might think that you brought them along the journey, but for some reason you haven't. There's some disconnect, and you need to fill that gap somehow, because they haven't, for some reason, it hasn't resonated with them to pull the trigger for whatever reason, whatever the reason that might be. But there is something that's missing. I think that is one where, and we did talked about that whole silver bullet thing as well. I think also the other part as well, that we need to be very careful when listening to people who have already had success. They've had the big successes, and they're on the stage and they get asked that question, and what's the one big thing that we don't go, ooh, that's what I got to do. That actually, it was 100 ducks that got them there, probably more.
The
1%
that's a great
is actually
analogy for that question, actually, man. I'm gonna steal that one from you. So that's something I take away. Yeah, it's 100 ducks. It's 100 ducks of success, not the one horse-sized duck. So yeah, but we seem to, through that lens, we seem to herald the horse-sized duck, don't we?
Oh, and I get it. I get why, because they are great sound bites. They're very good for Instagram. They're very good for TikTok, and I get why we do that. But I think we've got to be careful that we don't just go, oh, if I do this, that will make sure I'm successful. Even answer a question around, how do I get that person to, let's say my CEO, to say yes to this program? well, they've actually said yes to it, but for some reason not pulling the trigger, and they're giving you all types of objections. But you've said, well, actually, there's some disconnect there, and you probably need to do a lot more digging to figure out what that is, because what they're telling you, that one thing they're telling you, which is the mountain you've got to climb, actually, it may not be the mountain to climb. They're just telling you that's the horse-sized duck, but actually, there's quite a few other things they're not certain about, and you need to get over those hurdles before, or those ducks before you can get there. And I think it's a really good point. We can't be, and I think the other part that you make this point a lot in your presentations about building that trust to make that impact.
Build it before you need it. Yeah.
Before you need it, because if you're trying to change at the point of impact, I mean, you've said it's not dead and buried, but it's been very difficult. It's super difficult to change that point. But if you've got that trust in the bank, I love that analogy of, trust in the bank to start withdrawing and utilizing. I think that's a really good point. You've got to basically do the hard work, or the work beforehand. Set yourself up.
And today leaders need to do a lot of hard work. And I should be apologizing for saying that, but I also understand that as someone who's done a lot of the hard work, that once you master this capability, everything becomes a lot easier. The ducks don't keep coming. They don't stop coming. They'll keep coming. But you are way better equipped to handle them. So, yeah, got to do the hard work, folks.
I think that's a really interesting part that you brought up too, AJ, that around that hard work. And I think a lot of people put that down to, I just got to work longer hours. I think what you're saying is, no, you probably need to have difficult conversations, and not in the way we traditionally think about it, especially not in the employment law space, difficult conversation, performance management, or something like that. No, you're talking about having a conversation that could be potentially uncomfortable, switching your mindset, changing your mindset.
I call it hugging the cactus.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes.
You really got to embrace the cactus, and I just did a newsletter article on this, and it's about embracing the ugly right now so that they don't turn into bigger problems in the future. Everything escalates if you don't nip it in the bud. So you got to hug the cactus, and I think that's really, if you can get comfortable hugging cacti, metaphorically, of course. Please don't go out there and find some succulents to get friendly with. But just please put in the effort, and when you put in the effort, hug the cactus. Keep in mind the point of impact. Embrace the think, look, communicate framework. As a leader, you'll develop this capability so that no matter whatever challenges that you come to, you'll be able to navigate them successfully.
So as we finish up this podcast episode, I want you to recommend a book, movie, TV show, or podcast to listeners. What would it be and why?
Yeah, interesting one. I think rather than give you a very specific thing, I would challenge all your listeners out there to invest some time and energy picking up something obscure that you would not normally be caught dead listening to, right? So, for me, it might be, I don't know, a gardening show or something like that. Because, and what'll be really interesting is trying to find a comparison between that world and yours. And it is one of the greatest things that I offer my clients, is this out-of-town perspective, unconventional perspective, because it enables you to see things that other people just can't see, and is like an incredible superpower. And the only reason I have that is that is because I put in the hard work. Like I said right at the start, I'm a walking contradiction. I was born and raised in Australia, but I've got Sri Lankan parents. I studied technology, but I work as a professional speaker. All these little contradictions and the nuances in life will give you they'll become incredibly useful for you at some point, beyond trivia night, of course. So I encourage you to go out there and pick something obscure for 30 minutes on your walk or on your commute or whatever you're at. Pick something obscure, and your challenge is try and find a connection between what they're talking about, what they're doing, and seeing the similarities and what's different, and figuring out how can I make this useful. And that would be my recommendation. And
Um,
also subscribe to this podcast too. If you're not already subscribed, please do. I mean, it's incredible. Please do. It's incredible. And Jonathan, as you've heard for the last so many minutes that we've been chatting, he approaches this subject with real care and nuance. And I think that a lot of podcasts out there, and I'm not afraid to say this because I've got a lawyer now in my pocket, I think a lot of them tick boxes for the sake of it, and they don't really produce content of substance beyond volume. So Jonathan, it's been like absolute honor to serve your community both on this platform and in the gig that we did for the HR Engage alumni dinner. It's been definitely a true highlight of my career, so thank you, my friend.
it's been a pleasure, and I want you to leave us with to finish it off. Is there a quote or a moment of inspiration you'd like to leave us with, AJ?
Subscribe now. No.
That soundbite, that's a good one.
I think this will tie everything up. Yeah. And it's a quote that I heard very early on in my career, and it underpins everything that I do in my business, in my life, in my career. And this is the quote. Subscribe now. No. The quote is this. It's from American motivational speaker named Zig Ziglar. And this is the quote. You can have everything you want in life if you will just help enough other people get what they want. You can have everything you want in life if you will just help enough other people get what they want. And the minute I heard this, it unlocked so much opportunity for me. And this is why, if you go back and listen to everything I've said, it's always about serving others, trying to figure out what a person's identity is, presenting ideas within their context. If they walk into the room and I offer them an idea or a suggestion or a data point or something, are they in a mood to receive it? What are their shoulders like? What is their energy like? Where are they walking fast? Are they walking slow? Are they listening? Are they preoccupied with something else? I'm always looking to find out what people want so I can help move them towards that. And that underpins everything I do. And that's underpinned this episode as well.
That's a really good quote. I think everyone can take from listening to this podcast episode. AJ, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show today. I've really enjoyed our discussions. Look, there were some hard-hitting discussions, don't get me wrong, like difficult topics we traversed today, which, is a little bit different from what we've heard from a number of past guests. And that I thought that was really good. I think there was a really good spread of discussion. Now, if you're listening, we want to get this out to as many people as possible. So make sure you subscribe, make sure you repost, make sure you share, send it to a colleague, send it to your executive team, whatever you want to do. Now, I actually have heard from a guest who said they were listening to this in Baguio City in a car going to Manila, from Baguio City to Manila in the Philippines. I heard another person say they were listening to this on the beaches of Hawaii in America. And another one was actually listening to this while they were hiking in Colombia. So I thought that's pretty cool, because there's a bit of international flavor to the HR Engage podcast. But as always, I've absolutely enjoyed having people like AJ on here. But to get more of it out there, we've got to share this. So subscribe, follow, do all those things. We're all on all the platforms. So make sure you do that. That's for me. AJ, thank you so much.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you for the opportunity to serve.
And that's it for me, Jonathan Mamaril, host of the HR Engage podcast. As always, speak soon.